Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. I'm Rob Aragao, and I'm delighted to say that we have Eric O'Neill back with us today. If you heard the first part of our conversation last week, you'll know that Eric's career began in the FBI Counterintelligence as an undercover operative. His work brought down Robert Hanssen, the most notorious and damaging spy in United States history. And we covered that in quite a bit of depth in the previous episode, so it's definitely well worth going back to have a listen. We also spoke about cyber espionage versus cybercrime, AI and cyber espionage as well, and counter surveillance, drawing on all of Eric's many years of experience. But there's so much more that we didn't get to talk about. So Eric, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's good to be here.
One of the things I wanted to delve into are the threats related to critical infrastructure, Eric. We've seen many different examples of cyber-related events aimed at critical infrastructure, specifically within the US, but also overseas, of course. I just feel it's at its infancy stage, and at some point, there's going to be a major event, the one that's just going to be, unfortunately, the biggest event we probably have seen for quite some time. What are your thoughts, and how vulnerable truly are we?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. And often I get this question in different forms. And one of them is, what scares you the most? And here it is, critical infrastructure attacks. Remember that I think it's important to note, first of all, that critical infrastructure is a lot more than lights and power. There are 11 sectors defined by the US government that are critical infrastructure. Lights and power is one of them, but it goes to everything from what do you do with your wastewater to actual getting water from your taps to chemicals we need to manufacturing, finance, communications, what happens when your cell phone doesn't work. All of these things are vectors for attack. It makes us very vulnerable because it's very difficult to secure the full range of infrastructure that we as a society need to continue to be successful, efficient, and happy. So let's just focus on lights and power because it's sort of the holy grail if you're a bad guy and you want to cause significant harm. I mean, backups will work for a while, but I mean, without lights and power, here's a great example. Last night, my wife sent me to the grocery store. We needed some stuff. I went in and there was a person right at the door saying, we've had to close half of our aisles and shelves, all of the frozen and, refrigerated sections, because we've got a half power outage. I never even heard of that, but apparently it's possible. So you go to bulk food and you can go to the veggies that are, sitting around that don't need to be, but all of the chilled and refrigerated sections were taped off or closed off, and they had people frantically trying to remove all the frozen stuff, and it was all going bad. And I talked to one of the people there, and he said, we're going to lose thousands of dollars just in this one day. And this is a little tiny, corner grocery store, because this is all going to go bad unless the power comes on. So there can be significant repercussions that we don't even think about when power. And then you take it to like what happens in hospitals and people who need care, or people who have ventilator machines and a lot of people end up dying. So what's been happening in the US, and this isn't a recent occurrence, this is years. There are significant threat groups, primarily coming out of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Those are the big four, right? The big four bad guys, if you're sitting in the West or the United States, and certainly for cyber threat action. And they've been launching what's called probe attacks. Just seeing how deep they can get into the critical infrastructure, the SCADA networks, the networks that manage the flow of power or water or gasoline from the West Coast to the East Coast, all of those critical networks that allow things to work. Now, it's all run by data. It's not people who go drive out in a Jeep somewhere into the hinterlands and turn a valve. That's all done by computer systems. And the problem here in the US is a lot of it is run by private companies. Some of it is run by the government. Some of it is run by public-private partnerships. It's a little scattershot, which is probably one of the reasons that there hasn't been a large-scale critical infrastructure attack yet. It's hard to compromise all these different systems and agencies and companies all at the same time. But they're getting close. And a lot of the stuff isn't updated. It isn't hardened. It's running on old systems. It's unpatched. Remember talking about patching?
Exactly.
So it has known vulnerabilities that makes it very easy for, the Chinese attack group Volt Typhoon to embed themselves within different computer systems on part of our power grid, or the dangerous Russian attack group called Sandworm that was responsible for turning all the lights out in Ukraine using an incredibly clever cyber attack that, by the way, just started with phishing emails during the deepest, darkest part of winter, and right in front of their first invasion of Crimea. So they've shown they can do it, and they know they can do it, and no one's really saying it, but I know the government agencies are really scared about it because they've not only been able to infiltrate, but maintain persistence. That means sit around in there, lurking for months at a time sometimes before they're noticed and kicked out. So a lot of work has to be done here in the US to secure not only our critical infrastructure and power, but all of the other 11 sectors. I was doing some research for my new book, and it turns out that if you kinetically, so we talk about cyber attacks and kinetic attacks, right? We need to change the lexicon because wars are now mostly fought in cyber. I mean, one's happening right now. There's a global war in cyber. It's happening now. We just don't see it. And so if you were to launch kinetic attacks against 9 critical substations in the US, you can cause a catastrophic loss of power for a good part of the country. And a lot of these places are just secured with a chain link fence, not even a big dog or something guarding it. You just shoot it from afar. There have been domestic groups who do this every once in a while and knock out a portion of a grid for a town or something like that. But that worries me as well. So what if you paired the cyber attack with the kinetic attack? I mean, it's certainly been easy to move people across the southern border lately. And now you've got, a scenario like Red Dawn, that old movie that was rebooted again later for the younger people. A great movie to watch, by the way. Go Wolverines. But, that's the kind of stuff that worries me. Enough that I went and I put a whole solar array in my roof with a battery backup and all that. Just to make sure when it does happen. I think that within the next 2 years, the way that geopolitical tensions are going, we're probably going to see something like that happen.
Very possible. That's why I raised the question. I think to your point, right? It's just a matter of time that there will be a catastrophic event, unfortunately. You also raised another point that just triggered some thought process that we dealt with a while back, which is more kind of that the evolution of dealing with kind of the digital aspect of thing and fusion centers coming together, right? And one of those use cases that we had seen ties back into looking at these power stations and ballistics monitoring. So you could actually get some sensory off of the ballistic, a shot fired, hopefully misses or just reflects off, but would pick up, right? And so it's a trigger point for, again, looking at how we're kind of fusing together the digital aspect with the physical aspects of security as a whole. One other thing I wanted to get into is just kind of the example share relative to the great training that the FBI does around counterintelligence. And so, again, at a top level, whatever share, right, as it ties in kind of the aspect of how it applies to more so the role of a cyber threat hunter specifically.
Certainly. And I got to be careful because I don't want my former colleagues at the FBI to listen to the podcast and then show up at my door in black suits flashing their credentials.
Nobody wants that.
A lot of what I learned is still highly classified. I went to the National Security School at the FBI Academy in Quantico. I'm a Quantico graduate. And we learned, at the most basic level, tradecraft of all our adversaries, like I said earlier. So, my instructors were former spies that, had come over to the side of the angels and were helping us learn how the adversaries do what they do. I don't want to say bad guys because, let's be honest, whether you're good or bad in the spy game depends on what flag you raise, right?
That's true.
So we tend to think of them as adversaries, and in Russia they think of them as heroes. But you have to learn that tradecraft. You can't just go wandering down the street or conduct an investigation into anyone without knowing how they do what they do and what they plan to do and where they plan to go. So there's a lot of education. And then, of course, there's a lot of practical exercise in order to try out these techniques and learn them. So how do you apply this science of thinking like your adversary? Because that at the most top level is what you do in counterintelligence. You have to be able to analyze information in the mind of the adversary. So if I was the bad guy and I wanted to do this, what would I do? Right? And now you're looking at what a adversary will do in the future, and you're there ahead of them. That's the plan, right? So how do you translate that to cybersecurity? Well, you stop doing that old school thing that many companies still do, and it doesn't work anymore, called perimeter defense. And you need that, right? You got to have it. You got to have a wall and a moat around your castle. You're going to fortify your most critical data with everything you can, the best cybersecurity, the best people, the best techniques, the best policies. You can be real smart about it, but the attackers are still going to find a way to infiltrate. They'll use sappers under the walls, and they'll dig tunnels. They'll sneak in disguise. So what cybersecurity has become, the best in breed cybersecurity has become, is not the castle defense, but threat hunters. So you're using people who are trained like I was to look for threats, to actively hunt them, to be outside the walls, like pulling back the hoodie on the people trying to sneak in, right? And that sort of threat hunting is not just the future of cybersecurity. It's the only way to effectively maintain cybersecurity in a way that's going to stop the threats. And you earlier, Rob, were talking about your guest, I think the former head of cybercrimes at Interpol, if I recall.
Yeah. That's right.
Who was talking about the collaboration between countries who are trying to make the world safe from cyber attacks. That's part of this.
Right.
That's incredibly critical. Being able to rapidly gain threat intelligence about an adversary. And a lot of this is focused on cybercrime, because cybercrime is right now it's a $12 trillion crime. That's just cybercrime moving through the dark web. I mean, you can buy and sell anything on the dark web. It's the biggest drug trade on Earth. It's the biggest human trafficking trade on Earth. But just looking at cybercrime, we're looking around $12 trillion, which by GDP is the third largest economy on Earth.
It's crazy.
But just doing some math and predictions, I think by 2026 we'll be around $20 trillion. I mean, it's just growing astronomically. If you want to stop that, we need to collaborate effectively. So if we're attacked over here, then everybody learns about it quickly. We've been doing this in the US. CISA is doing a yeoman's job in trying to pull together those public-private partnerships of cybersecurity companies, industry, and, of course, intelligence units like the FBI's IC3 and NSA advanced threat information, and the best work that the CIA is doing, because that's some of the golden intelligence about new cyber attacks that are coming and what we need to do to prepare and be ready. This new group is launching attacks, and these are the kind of attacks they're launching, and these are the kind of techniques, the TTPs they're using, and here's what you need to be prepared for. I mean, that's golden for cybersecurity companies, but also for industry that needs to protect themselves. So all of these collaborative approaches are counterintelligence. It's creating that science of countering spies, or cybersecurity is just another word for counterintelligence, or should be. It's the science of stopping cyber threats. And that's what we need to do in cyber. And that's my big platform. It's what my entire next book I'm writing right now is about, or actually written. It'll be out next year. And I hope that more people sort of adopt this way of thinking, because it's the only way we're going to make the world safe from cyber attacks, if that's even possible. We can make it a little bit better.
Well, we can make it better. Yeah, exactly. And you led me right into what I want to ask you about next is invisible threat. Your next book. Talk a little bit top level about it. When's it coming out? Just tell the audience what's next.
Certainly. So the invisible threat is sort of the natural progression from Gray Day. If you read Gray Day, my book that came out in 2019, it is an undercover look into catching Robert Hansen, who, we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, and exactly how I did it. It's written in the first person. It's from behind my eyes. I take you into an FBI investigation. The FBI declassified tons of information to allow me to even talk about it. But what it also does in a sneaky way, so you're really enmeshed in this spy story reads like a thriller, but it also talks about everything you need to know to understand the evolution of espionage. So the next book, The Invisible Threat, takes that to the next level in looking at how espionage has been applied by cybercrime. So we're going to focus on cybercrime, taking it from there. And what I wanted to do was write a book that would be very readable. It's a collection of stories with a story of a massive cyber attack that I was in the middle of that threads through the whole book, kind of like what I did with Gray Day. And those stories teach you the skills that I learned in the FBI as a counterintelligence operative, how to think like the adversary. But here we're not thinking like, the Russian SVR. We're thinking like the different cybercrime groups who are using things like deception, impersonation, AI-based attacks, how to recognize those attacks, how to think like a spy. And then the second part of the book is all the tools and techniques you need to act like a spy hunter. So I'm going to put you in the mind of an FBI undercover counterintelligence agent and make you think that way. So part of the book reads really cool because you're learning all these new skills.
Right.
It's really interesting because you're immersed in stories. And I, as a stage, a global on-stage public speaker, I find that storytelling is the best way to get your point across. It's the most memorable way. I mean, this is what you do in podcasts. You listen to stories and you ask probing questions and people remember it. And it's also really readable and fun. And the most edifying thing about this book is all my beta readers, and they've come from just friends who know nothing about cybersecurity to CISOs who, should know a lot about cybersecurity,
right.
To my agent and managers and all of that. Even my dad have come back and said, I read your book and somebody tried to do this to me and I caught it. That's what I want. Yeah. That's what I want. I want this. I wanted to write something that people will read because I've got, a whole bookcase of cybersecurity books that people put on their shelves but don't actually read cover to cover. And two, they will learn from it, but learn from it in a fun way, reading cool stories and learning from it that way. And then catch the bad guys when they try to fool them. Because the majority of these cybercrime attacks is deception. It all is deception. I say that cybercrime runs on an engine of deception. So if you can teach yourself not to be deceived, you'll protect yourself from 99.9% of cybercrime attacks.
Excellent. So looking forward to the new book. I think your approach to it just sounds so fascinating because, again, as you said, you're sharing the stories and then you're sharing kind of the actions and educational elements that people can take away and apply for themselves to not have these things occur to them or not have them occur to them again, right? Depending on
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Eric, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for all the great work you've done to help, obviously, our worlds that we live in within the U.S. specifically, and also everything that you're doing to continue to help promote and educate everyone globally on the way to think differently to go after the adversary. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, Rob, it's been my pleasure.
Hello, producer Ben here, and as the US reaches the final stages of the 2024 presidential race, I just wanted to point you towards episode 93 of Reimagining Cyber, called Secure the Vote Inside Election Defences. It features Dr. Ben Adida, the co-founder and executive director of Voting Works. He's renowned for his expertise in safeguarding voting processes, and he shared insights from his 2-decade journey at the forefront of election security, offering a deep dive into the complexities of ensuring the integrity of our democratic process.
I think election results should be reported really quickly. And I think there's more progress to be made in how election results are reported today. That's another point where there could be attacks on the system that ultimately are chaos attacks, right? So think about hacking websites of election results. It's going to be discovered. Like we'll know, oh, that's not the result. We'll fix it. But the chaos created if you claim one winner the night of elections and a different one the next day,
right?
That's a problem, right? So yeah, I think, oh, and let me add one thing that is very close to my heart. I think we need dramatically more transparency around all the technology in throughout the technology stack.
That's Dr. Ben Adida in episode 93 of Reimagining Cyber, called Secure the Vote Inside Election Defences. Thanks for spending your time here with us on Reimagining Cyber. If you're listening on Apple, please do leave us a 5-star rating and review. It helps other cyber security fans find the show. Goodbye.